The ROG Ally X, it's been out for about 4 months now, and it's the current performance king, beating out the Legion Go, the Steam Deck, its predecessor, the ROG Ally, and the MSI Claw. But now we have the next generation of handhelds that have just arrived. We have the new OneXFly F1 Pro from OneXPlayer that features AMD's new chip, the AI9 HX370. So today we're going to take a look at the OneXFly F1 Pro to see how it stacks up against the Ally X and what the hype is all about. And here's the OneXFly F1 Pro. The one that I got is the HX370, which is the most powerful of the options. And I wanted to quickly go over what you get in the box. We're going to go over the specs a bit later. But what you get in the box is pretty straightforward. You have your power block, which is 65 watts, and has a single USB-C port. You have a two-sided USB-C cord that's braided so you can charge your device. And what you get is a couple of cards thanking you for your purchase and the instruction manual. Make sure to keep an eye on this. There's certain light codes that you need to keep track of, so don't throw this away. And that's pretty much all that you get in the box. One thing that was kind of neat is I bought mine a little bit early, so I got this OneXPlayer metal. So not everybody's going to get this, but I think it was just a part of the pre-orders. Kind of neat, not sure why they did it, but either way it looks kind of cool. Some bundles got it included and some did not. If not, you can always buy it from their store, is the carrying pouch. Pretty straightforward, just a simple hard shell case that you can store your device in. And that's pretty much all that you get in the box, so let's take a look at the specs now. Now for the specs, we have the Ryzen AI9 HX370 with the 890M iGPU. You can get either 32 or 64 gigabytes of RAM, that's LPDDR5X at 7500 megatransfers per second. Big highlight is the new OLED display, that's 1080p at 144 Hz. And the other two specs that I'll highlight is it has a 48 watt-hour battery and the device weighs 599 grams. Taking a closer look at the device, the first thing that I must say is I really do like the look of the OneXFly. I've liked it since the first generation, and I'm kind of happy that they didn't change the design. I know some people don't really care about RGB. I kind of like it, and I made my own little custom tag. As you can see here, if you just use like a Cricut, you can basically cut out a tag and just stick it in there. For the controllers, the D-pad feels pretty good, like it rolls around well. I've never really had any issues with like accidental diagonals. So if I'm playing Street Fighter and, trying to do Hadokens or Shoryukens, it's not an issue. And the face buttons, they feel pretty good. They're not like overly mushy. They are membrane, but they're not too squishy. And I also find that they're not overly clicky. They just feel pretty balanced, I would say. And then for the bumpers and triggers, I find that the bumpers are pretty nice. Like no matter where you press them, you're going to get a button press, which is really nice. There's some handhelds that if you press it over here, you're not going to get a press, which is pretty annoying. So these ones are definitely solid. Then for the triggers, they're decent. They're not too large of a motion, which, some people want a larger trigger, some people want a shorter one. These ones feel, I would just say, just the average handheld. They're really comfortable to use. They don't feel like overly loose, or I don't know how to describe it. Like some of them just feel like there's nothing there, no tension. They feel kind of cheap. These ones actually have decent tension, which is really nice. Then on to the joysticks. The joysticks are a little bit smaller than some other devices. Like if you're comparing it to the ROG Ally X or the Steam Deck, you have a smaller hole here that they're spinning around. They do feel fairly tight because of the smaller hole, but you're not going to get the same range of motion. So I would say the joysticks, they're not as nice as something like the Ally X or Steam Deck, but they're still pretty decent. They don't feel overly loose like some other devices. Then taking a quick look at the other buttons that we have here, we have a home button. This will bring up the desktop. You have a button here to pull up the One X console app. I don't have mine running right now, but normally that would pull out the side menu. This button's for a keyboard as well as to turn on mouse mode. So if you hold it, then you can move around your mouse and navigate windows. Then we have our start and our back button. And on the top, we have two buttons. These are programmable macro buttons. So we have M1 and M2. On the back, we don't have any buttons, just the back of the shell. Then taking a look at our top here, we have our power button. We have a really large volume rocker. We have a headphone jack, a USB-C, which is Type 4, and a USB-A. Then taking a look at the bottom, we have a single USB-C port as well as a micro SD slot. Then on both sides, we have down-facing speakers, which are pretty decent. We'll get to that a little bit later. Overall, it's a fairly comfortable handheld to hold. The grips, they feel pretty nice. Like they're not overly small, they're not too big. It just kind of fits right in the hand. It feels pretty solid. The device isn't too heavy, I think it's about 600 grams, so it feels pretty good to hold. Overall though, I would say that it's a pretty decent handheld, just looking at how it looks and how it feels to use. Next, we're going to move on to some testing. We're going to compare the sound and the screen to some other devices, as well as game performance versus the Ally X. And we're going to do a battery life test at 30 watts as well as 15. On to the performance test, we're going to test out the OneXFly AI370 versus the Ally X. First game up is Horizon Forbidden West at 30 watts with FSR off in the lowest settings. We have between a 4 to 9 FPS advantage for the OneXFly. We're going to take a look to see how that scales when we adjust the settings. Now for settings that I actually play at, I usually turn on frame gen for this game. I don't use FSR because it gets very muddy. For the OneXFly, we're in the 50s. For the Ally X, we're low 40s, sometimes high 30s. And now at 15 watt with 720p frame gen and FSR off, we're getting mid to high 20s on the OneXFly and mid to low 20s on the Ally X. For Baldur's Gate 3 at 30 watts with FSR off, ultra settings 1080p, we're getting just under 30 FPS for the OneXFly. Sometimes it'll go above, but usually hovering around that line. And when we take a look at 15 watts, I'm running with no FSR again. I've set it to low and 720p. We're getting roughly 30 FPS on the OneXFly. And for the Ally X in this section, we're getting mid 20s. It does bump up to just under 30 FPS, but that's when the OneXFly is also just under 40. For God of War, FSR off, 30 watts, low settings at 1080p. We're getting mid to high 40s for the OneXFly and low 40s for the Ally X. And now at the settings I play at, I've turned FSR to balanced, and we're getting mid 60s to high 60s for the OneXFly here, and mid to high 50s for the Ally X. And now going down to 15 watts, 720p with FSR off, we're getting the high 40s for the OneXFly, and we're getting high 30s to low 40s for the Ally X here. And now moving on to Helldivers 2 with the Steam Deck settings, 1080p, 30 watts, we're getting mid to high 40s for the OneXFly here, and mid to high 30s for the Ally X. Now changing to settings I actually play at, I've turned FSR to balanced, same settings otherwise. I'm getting 60 to mid 60s on the OneXFly here, and low 50s for the Ally X. And now down to 15 watts, still at 1080p, we're getting mid 30s for the OneXFly, and we're getting just under 30 for the Ally X. At these settings, I probably should have opted for 720p rather than 1080. Now for Cyberpunk at 30 watt with FSR turned off in high settings, we're getting just under 30 for the OneXFly, and we're getting low 20s for the Ally X. And now for settings that I'd actually play at, I've turned on frame generation as well as FSR 3 quality. And here we get mid to high 60s for the OneXFly, and we're getting low to mid 50s on the Ally X. And then 15 watts FSR 3 quality, high setting 720p, we're getting mid 30s for the OneXFly and mid 20s on the Ally X. Overall in the games that I tested, we're seeing anywhere from a 10 to up to a 30% increase in performance when you're jumping over to this new chip. I will say that this doesn't necessarily apply to every single game. I actually tested out Black Ops 6 versus a friend with his Ally X. And his Ally X was actually beating my OneXFly by about 1 or 2 frames, so they were performing pretty much the same. His Ally X was running the 7840 drivers, where mine's running stock, so that could be a difference. And there could be other optimizations that perhaps he's already done. Before we move on from gameplay, I did have a number of requests for me to try out some 4 watt TDP, so the lowest that the device can go, so let's take a look at a couple of games and how they perform. The first game we'll take a look at is a classic, Fallout New Vegas. We're playing this at 4 watts, lowest settings at 720p. It's pretty crazy. At these settings, we're getting in the 60s all the way up to the 90s. It really fluctuates, but consistently it seems to be over 60 FPS. Persona 5 at 720p, lowest settings, we're getting roughly mid 20s to mid 30s, which is decent for this style of game. And some other games that you could play that are quite obvious, they aren't really resource heavy, would be Celeste. Here I'm playing at 4 watts again, 720p. Didn't seem to have any issues, was running very smooth. And then if we take a look at a game like Metal Slug X, it runs full speed. If you're running at 30 watt, it would run exactly the same that it is now. So if you want to drop the watts down to 4, you can do that, and you should be able to have a good time playing a number of different games. Next up, we're going to take a look at the battery life. I did a drain test at 30 watt and 15, so let's take a look. For the battery test, I chose Cyberpunk 2077, cranked up the settings, and went to a very taxing area in the game. And at 30 watts, we got 1 hour and 2 minutes, which is not too bad. If you compare that versus the ROG Ally and Ally X, I did a test on those where it was running at 25 watt instead of 30. And I got 49 minutes on the ROG Ally and 1 hour and 56 minutes on the Ally X. If they were at 30 watts, I would estimate about 40 to 45 minutes on the Ally and about 1 hour 45 to 1 hour 50 on the Ally X. Running at the exact same settings and dropping down to 15 watts, I found that I was able to get 1 hour and 43 minutes. So if you're willing to drop your settings a little bit, you can definitely get some good game performance at 15 watts, and you can get a decent amount of battery life. For most people, this should be plenty of battery life. Now we're going to take a look at the speakers. I did have to lower the volume on these clips to have them fit within the video, but I lowered it by the same amount for every clip. So it should give you a good comparison between a few different devices. So that's what the OneXFly speakers sound like. They have really good bass. They seem to have a pretty rich sound. I find that the highs aren't as pronounced as some of the other devices. I would say that it's not quite as nice as the MSI Claw, but I would say it's better than the Ally X. The Steam Deck is also very close, but doesn't seem to have quite as much bass. So really it's up to preference, but I do really like the speakers. You just need to make sure that you have the Harman APO installed, which is supposed to come installed with the device. However, I didn't have that and I had to manually do it. But I'm going to go more into that a little bit later on. One other standout feature for the OneXFly is its OLED display, so I'm just going to show you very quickly what it looks like compared to a few other devices. Here it is versus last year's OneXFly. You can see that the colors are a little bit brighter, a little bit more vibrant. And beside the Steam Deck OLED, both look fairly vibrant. I found that the OneXFly was a little bit brighter, and the Legion Go looks pretty good, but it is a little bit darker than the OneXFly. Overall, the display looks really nice. It's really hard to showcase on a video, but in person, the colors are really vibrant, the blacks are pretty deep. It's pretty much everything that you would expect from an OLED display. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is actually the software experience on the OneXFly. So with the OneXFly, there's a program that you get installed on it called OneX Console. And this is the software that controls your TDP, it can control your brightness, your sound, the RGB, pretty much anything that you need to control on the device, this is where you're going to do it. And there's two different menus you can get from here. There's the pull-out menu that you see on a lot of devices. It's very straightforward, pretty easy to use. And many of the buttons here have sub-menus where you can customize things further, like the RGB, you can select the different colors that you'd like. You can fine-tune things with the CPU turbo, where you can limit the CPU to a certain percentage. You can adjust the resolution from here, or you can even adjust the fan curves. You can make your own custom fan curve to kick on whenever you'd like it to, so you can make it aggressive or a little bit quieter. If you go into the larger menu, you can see that there's a lot more that you can do here. You can import a game library, so you can actually launch your games from this app. You can also adjust the VRAM from here, so you adjust the VRAM, then reboot the system and it should stick. There's various controller settings. You can adjust the dead zone of the triggers, the dead zone of the joysticks. You can adjust the joystick response curve or even the dead zone here. I did find that some of the response curves were kind of bugged right now. They're not working perfectly, so that's something that hopefully will be addressed in a future update. Overall, OneX Console seems to work pretty well. It does what you need it to do. You can keep it simple, or you can go a little more in depth like I was showing. And the other thing that I wanted to talk to is actually the experience using the device. So the device has, like I said, really good performance. The sound is great. The screen is amazing. It sounds like everything is just great in paradise here, but that's not necessarily the case. I believe there was an issue with a batch, this is just my theory, where there was something wrong with the Windows installs because I had a number of issues with my Windows. It was just not updating, it was causing driver issues. And I tried to repair it, it just was simply not working. Like, it would work for a while and then the issues would come back. And the only resolution was actually to reinstall Windows fresh. And then I installed the drivers from the driver pack, and everything seemed to be working pretty much perfectly after that. So that is part of the experience, but I don't think that that's going to be something that would impact most devices if my theory is correct. I'm pretty sure it was just a bad batch, because it doesn't seem to impact everyone, but it has impacted a few of us in the Discord server. I figured that was just worth mentioning. Like I said, I don't think it's a big deal to fix, but you should just be aware that if you had purchased the device right up front, there is probably a batch there that has this issue. And if you need help resolving it, go to the OneXFly Discord. There's a bunch of us there that were working on this, and it's pretty easy to fix. And now to wrap things up, I wanted to cover what I like about the device and what are some things that I believe can be improved. The first thing that I like is the OLED display. Honestly, it's something that I really hoped that they had on the original OneXFly, so finally seeing it on this device, I'm pretty pumped about. Another thing that I like is actually the ergonomics, or just how comfortable the device is. I find that it's probably one of the most comfortable devices that I have, so that's saying a lot. I would probably put it up there in the Steam Deck category of comfort for me. Next up is the speakers. Once you have that Harman APO installed, if it wasn't from factory, they sound amazing. Great sound, great bass. I find that the highs are maybe a little bit lacking, but overall I really like the speakers. And next up is performance. As far as this chip goes, it is currently the most powerful one that we can get on the market, so the performance is obviously the top tier right now as of the time we're recording. And lastly, the device just overall feels fairly balanced. It seems to balance a lot of the things that I want in a handheld, so I do really like it. I really like the device, but there's obviously things that could still be improved. Some of the things that I would say is, first of all, the joysticks. If they had full-size modules like the ROG Ally or the Steam Deck, I think that would be a much better call for this device. Secondly, the Windows experience. Now, these things happen. Sometimes Windows just gets bugged out, but this was something that happened to a few devices. Like I said, I think it was just a bad batch. But hopefully in the future it's something that's caught during the QA process so that users don't have to fix it. Another thing that I think would be a cool inclusion is Oculink. Unfortunately it does not have that, but I would definitely be using that with my eGPU. And lastly, if they were able to fit a larger battery in here, that would be great, just to increase the battery life and get a little bit closer to what some of the other devices are currently doing. And that pretty much wraps it up. Like I said, I really do like the device. There's still things that can be ironed out, some stuff with the user experience, some things with the hardware, like the joysticks for an example. But overall, if you want to be on the bleeding edge where you get the most powerful device that you can get currently, this is a great handheld. Just be prepared that there might be little bugs because it is a new chip, and with sometimes having these Windows experiences where things are not updating or whatnot, that you may need to do some tweaking and repairing to get it to work perfectly. So if you're willing to do that, honestly, this is a great device. I would definitely recommend checking it out. The OneXFly is more expensive than the last generation of chips, so just be prepared that you're going to end up paying more if you want to get this extra performance. And the next generation with the Z2 Extreme is likely going to be based on this chip. That's what the rumors are, that it'll have the 890M iGPU. I'm guessing we're probably going to see some price increases there as well. But if you want to get the next generation now, check out the link in the description. I'll leave a link where you could purchase the device, and let me know what your thoughts are on this. Is this something that you want to check out, or is this one you're going to be passing on? I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.